part of Davidson's journey to Auschwitz in 2018, so you can watch the screen for the film.
Why did you choose to come on this trip? Why did you choose to come on this trip? Why did you choose to come on this trip?
I may be the last one who can say that I rode the trains or marched with my congregation through a black forest rain, past gypsy camps and the open pit shame. I was 21 and shackled, and now I remain as the last one who can say that I rode the trains. I may be the last one who can say that I saw the ash or felt the fresh cut of barbed wire in no man's land, between all the farms gone blind and afraid to see.
I'm forever challenged by the quest to turn our players into leaders, to help them become better leaders. And what a tremendous opportunity to gain a tremendous perspective on an historical event that, in my judgment, is probably the most horrific event in the history of man, and to see how they can become the leaders in their generation of living the message that this can't happen again.
When Coach first came to you with the idea of spending part of your summer break in Auschwitz, what was your first reaction?
Personally, I was extremely excited. Just knowing that we were going to be given the opportunity to take such a unique trip as a group of guys, and just to continue to strengthen our bond whilst learning about probably the most heinous period of history in the world, and just knowing that we were going to have an opportunity to grow as people, to see such an incredible example through Eva and her story. We were all filled with excitement, and personally, as a person who's always wanting to just become, more wiser and filled with wisdom, and hopefully being able to give back eventually, I was extremely excited at the opportunity.
I was excited at the opportunity. I was also scared, but I was intrigued because I've heard stories about what went on during the Holocaust, but I never imagined getting a personal look at what actually took place.
In no man's land, between all the farms gone blind and afraid to see the trains come full and leave no blame. I'm the last one who can say that I saw the ash. At centuries, and though our births were not noted, our deaths as survivors must not be forgotten. Blood in mass graves will soak past the bottom by the time all the names of our towns.
We've spent the day today, and we'll spend the day tomorrow, remembering the past and everything that took place here. And now it's our turn to give a gift back. It's our turn to do something. It's our turn to protect the future. We need to take care of each other. We're all different, but we share one thing in common. We're all members of humankind. And as members of humankind, we owe it to one another. We owe it to the people who lost their lives here. We owe it to the future to care for each other, to show respect, to show human dignity, and to never let something like this ever happen again.
That's just a brief moment of that trip to Auschwitz in 2018 with the Davidson College, led by Coach Bob McKillop. And so, Coach, Eva wasn't tall enough to be the center of your basketball team, but she was the center of this trip. And so take us back to that day when you get a phone call from Stacy Gallen, who, again, we want to thank for really making this happen, who actually is in Auschwitz right now with a tour from the New Jersey Federation. It's the day after the NCAA tournament where you really don't bother a coach, especially when it's a loss, and you get a call saying, let's go to Auschwitz.
Well, I certainly received the opportunity with open arms because I was a history major in college. I was a history teacher for 6 years before becoming a basketball coach at Davidson College. And it was stunning to me that the world, particularly the new generations that we're seeing right now, were oblivious to the Holocaust, to what happened. As Kellen said, a heinous event, the most horrific event, I think, in mankind, and it was lost in the history books. How could this happen? Our players are very articulate, very caring, very intellectual, and this was an opportunity for them to become messengers, to become leaders, to see firsthand what that experience was, and then to carry that message forward. And I believe they were remarkable in the way they handled the experience. And just so you know, we didn't bring a basketball. We left on a Saturday night, got there on a Sunday about 3 o'clock in the afternoon into Krakow, met with Eva that night, and Monday, Tuesday, we toured Birkenau and Auschwitz, and then went home on Wednesday. This was the first week of July. We were not engaged in practice. We were not engaged in any basketball activities, so our guys gave their time for this, and they did it with open arms.
So this wasn't your first time in Auschwitz. Why did you go that first time? And most people, when they go to a place like that, says, I can never go back again. But you decided to go back again, and we'll hear from Alex in a moment, you've been over 25 times to that place of hell on earth. Why go again?
You can read things in a history book, you can watch things on a movie, but unless you walk those paths and unless you look at that hair and unless you see those shoes and you see those gas chambers and the conditions that existed there, you don't understand how bad it was. And I had gone there I'd taken a group of alums there maybe 7 years earlier, and we had gone to Warsaw, and we had gone to Krakow, and we'd gone to Birkenau and Auschwitz and the Warsaw Ghetto and the Warsaw Cemetery, and it opened my eyes then. And that message needed to be delivered, and what better way to deliver it than with the players of a prominent basketball program.
And so let's go to Graham. Alex is going to save you for last. You write about this in this book. If you haven't gotten this book, there's a chance to buy it after. If you're watching online, make sure you go on Amazon. Unbracketed, big-time college basketball done the right way. And you write about Eva Kor's story and the Davidson College program. Where did you hear about this, and why was it so important to memorialize this in a book forever?
First of all, thank you so much for allowing us to be here. It's truly an honor. Alex and I have been friends.
It's an honor because today you went to Pauley Pavilion.
We did go to Pauley Pavilion. Of course, doing something basketball, that's what we do. But Alex and I have been friends for about 10 years, and I knew his story, and I guess it was right before the trip in 2018, and I knew about this wonderful experience that Eva Kor led every year, and he goes, you're not going to believe who's coming this year, and it's the Davidson College basketball team, and I was just awestruck. You know, I said it at a lunch today. People don't realize how unique this was. And our hope in the days and years following is that more teams will do this. But college basketball teams can travel about every 4 years, and 99.9% of the time, they're going over to, quote unquote, get better as a team. They're scheduling games against some semi-pro teams. And this was just so unique that, and we put this line was so important for us in the book, that the Davidson players did not touch a basketball. There's so much pressure on these coaches to win that Coach McKillop saying, we're not going to worry about playing games, or this is going to be the ultimate classroom where we're going to learn. And my co-author and I, Jerry Logan, who can't be here today, a couple years after that, we're coming up with we wrote our first book on Butler University, where I work, and we had a second idea about how can you profile the good things in college athletics. If you pick up the newspaper today, you'll read, there are a couple big stories right now on Northwestern firing their coach for some things, and another coach from West Virginia who's fighting to get his job after doing, quite frankly, a lot of bad things. We said there's still real good in college athletics, and people need to hear this story. And a small circle of us knew that, and the Davidson community knew it, but really, really wanted to broaden that out to a more public audience. So the last thing I'll say is you mentioned Sister Jean, and originally when we were coming up with the draft for the book, we led off with Sister Jean's. I'm assuming everybody knows who she is.
She's do a little intro to her.
Yeah. 103-year-old nun, crazy basketball fan, wonderful lady. We were going to start the book with Sister Jean's story, and I said, Jerry, we've got to introduce it with the Davidson story about going to Auschwitz. It's so powerful, it's so unique, and the joke I had, which really wasn't a joke, the guilt of moving Sister Jean to the back of the book really haunted me for about a week. But we just ultimately, Rabbi, wanted to showcase this unique story, continuing to tell about the atrocities of the Holocaust, and again, showcase there are people like Coach McKillop who really are truly educators in college athletics.
So, Alex, you were on this trip as the son of Eva Kor, and have been to Auschwitz multiple times. Actually, there's some people here that I believe she was a survivor on the March of the Living when they went. Literally a living hero in the movement of going back to Poland and learning about the Holocaust in firsthand experience. And also, Eva was a gigantic basketball fan, as I saw many Facebook posts over the years of you and your parents of blessed memory. What did this mean for her to take these young people who usually weren't her normal students on this type of mission?
So, like Graham said, thank you for having us. When I would go with my mom, I went 25 times. Most of the time was to keep my mom out of trouble. So let's be clear there. When my mom always loved the opportunity to teach, no matter whom, but she had a special affinity toward younger people, and particularly high school and college kids. And, she got to Auschwitz when she was 10, and she would tell me that the second that she stepped off onto the selection platform, she was no longer a child. So she really gravitated toward teaching young people. My father, also a survivor, big basketball fan. We could talk about that. So my mom knew about basketball, and when she was presented this idea, just loved the idea. And she liked tall people because she was, 5'1" on a good day. But it was just I've been there 25 times. I was there 2 weeks ago. And obviously for numerous reasons, this was by far one of the most incredible trips. These players, you never know how somebody's going to react. And I've been with young people age 10 all the way to age 90, and you never know. And these players, and I was really impressed by Coach here. He let them feel what they had to feel. Some wanted to hug my mom. Some wanted to be left alone. Some wanted to cry. Some wanted, to talk. So it was just incredible. I watched him from a distance because I was always in a situation where I had to worry about somebody in the group. And I just think it was, as Graham said, I think we really want to continue this because there's so many good things that can come from teaching about such a terrible time in history. And I think in this day and age when we have so many young people that really they don't know where they're going, and more importantly, they don't know about the Holocaust, I think this is an incredible time in history for me as a second generation to kind of follow my mom's footsteps.
And so, Coach, you told me earlier today that these students, as you were speaking to them, didn't even know so much about the Holocaust. Is there a moment on that trip that you realized the potential turned into reality of what they could be, as you said, turning them into leaders?
As you referenced Eva with forgiveness, and as Alex referenced his mom with the selection platform becoming no longer a young girl. Eva took us to the selection platform, and I'm sure you've seen pictures of the train track and the train, and she stood at that selection platform and in the greatest of detail described the doors opening, the Nazis screaming, the dogs barking, the guns everywhere, the people shouting, the chaos, and she described how she lost her family at that moment. And I think the exact quote she had said was one of the Nazis came up to her and said to the mom, are they twins, Miriam and Eva? And they would, of course, they were dressed alike. And Eva's mom said, is that a good thing? And he said, yeah. And she said, they are twins. And that was the last she saw her mother. The Nazis ripped the mother from holding the two girls and took her in one direction and put the girls in the other direction. And for this woman to tell our players about forgiveness in that particular position right there, and she even said, and when I got off the train, I could smell the new poured cement. That's how graphic she was in her description and memory, and she could forgive people for that. You can't get a more powerful message from that experience than that.
Did that lead into the locker room over that year ahead, that those players were now on a basketball court competing at a high level, where they're, I know it sounds almost crude, but locker room talks based on sort of Eva's inspiration sometimes, or was it more sort of just informal talk along the year and inspiration from her story?
It was a combination of internally galvanized, but also there was a diffusion of many potential calamitous basketball experiences, whether it was a referee or it was playing time or it was a loss or selfishness by another player. The forgiveness aspect permeated that locker room as almost like an aphrodisiac.
And so, Graham, you weren't on this trip, but now you've been, I would say, inducted to this family of Eva Kor and the Davidson basketball team. You're at Butler University. As maybe you can share about Eva's connection to Butler, how she gave her commencement address there, and what her story and this story has done to a campus that has really no relation to Davidson.
Yeah, so I mentioned my relationship with Alex. I'm on the fundraising side, and my job is to go out and, quite frankly, ask alumni for dollars. And I wrote
Butler alumni here. Keep talking.
So I wrote a letter to Alex about 10 years ago and asked him if he was living in Baltimore at the time, and asked if I could meet with him. And he read between the lines that, I was coming to ask for a check. And he says he almost ripped that letter up, which a number of prospective donors actually do that. So I was glad that he didn't. I'm not sure if he regrets that or not, but we sat down at a restaurant in Baltimore, and I knew all about his mom's story. It was the most unique research I'd ever done for a donor, because I listened to many of his mom's lectures, and we sat for about 3 hours. We really connected. Really the talk bounced back between the Holocaust and basketball. And he said, my mom has spoken all over the world. His mom was amazing in many facets, but she was giving more than 100 lectures up until her death all over the world. But he said, my mom's never spoken at my alma mater, which is Butler University. And so I came back to campus. Alex didn't write me a check that night, but we got a bigger win, because I went back and I asked our president. I said, I think we really need to get Mrs. Kor to campus. And about a week later, he said, she's going to be our commencement speaker this year. And I've seen many commencement speeches. We have our commencement at Hinkle Fieldhouse, which is a pretty famous, right up there with Pauley Pavilion, famous arena. If you've seen the movie Hoosiers, that's where the final scenes were filmed. And I've seen many great basketball games there, but my favorite moment was her commencement speech, which you can watch on YouTube, and I highly encourage you to do so. And capacity crowd, graduates, their families. And she talked about her stance on forgiveness, but the piece that really hit me is she said, when you go home today, to all you graduates, I want you to hug your parents. Because when I was liberated from Auschwitz, I was looking around for my parents, and they were no longer there. They had been executed. And she then said, I want my son Alex, who was sitting in the front row, I said, I want my son Alex to come up and I want to give him a hug. And that was one of the most beautiful, poignant moments in my career, and received a standing ovation. And we ended up endowing a scholarship for Mrs. Kor, which we have a unique program, Peace and Conflict Studies, and the scholarship supports that and still grows every year. And so she has been my hero. She's influenced so many people to forgive someone in their lives. And we're very proud that Alex is a Butler alum, but the special history that we have with his mother as well.
And Alex, let's just talk about Terre Haute, Indiana for a little while. Basketball, people know that it's a place where Larry Bird grew up in Indiana State. But there's also a little Los Angeles connection. Maybe you can share that connection with UCLA and your dad as well. But also candles. What is candles, and why in Terre Haute, Indiana, is there a Holocaust museum?
So let me go backwards. My father's also a survivor, was a survivor, 4-year survivor from Buchenwald, was originally from Riga, Latvia. He was liberated outside of Buchenwald by American GI. That eventually led my dad to come to Terre Haute. My dad on a good day was about 5'1", 5'2". In Riga, he played soccer. But in the United States in 1946, he realized basketball was born in Indiana. We all know that. And so he wanted to learn how to play basketball. So he finished high school, and he wanted to go to pharmacy school. He couldn't get into Butler or Purdue. So he enrolls at Indiana State Teachers College in Terre Haute. So he finds out that the gym teacher is also the basketball coach. Well, for all you UCLA fans, that gym teacher was John Wooden. So Coach Wooden was my dad's gym teacher, and at the end of the first semester, Coach Wooden said, Mickey, you're really good influence on some of these younger kids. Would you take the class again? I'm going to give you an A. So my dad took the class again, and Coach Wooden and my dad had a friendship. And then a year later, of course, Coach Wooden ends up in Westwood. A year later, my dad ends up in pharmacy school. My father becomes a pharmacist. My mom and my aunt by this time had gone to Israel. My mom was a sergeant major in the Israeli army. My father went to Israel to see his brother, was set up on a blind date with my mom. On the third date, he spoke no Hebrew. On the third date, my dad said something. My mom said yes, and she got a ring on her finger. And so she ends up coming to Terre Haute. My first language is Hebrew because my mom spoke Hebrew. I have a younger sister. And so why Terre Haute? Why candles? Candles stands for Children of Auschwitz, Nazi Deadly Laboratory Experimental Survivors. And my mother, my aunt lived in Israel, and my aunt died in 1993, and so my mom wanted to do something in my aunt's memory, so she founded the museum. She didn't like driving to Indianapolis, which is about an hour and 15 minutes away, so my mom was in real estate, got a building that she used to rent out. That was the home of candles, and it still is, even though the museum was destroyed by a white supremacist in 2003. But the Candles Museum still stands in Terre Haute. Just to bring things full circle, as a Butler alum, we are trying to make inroads. Probably Butler University might be the site of an Indianapolis location in the future. We hope so.
And Coach, the non-basketball side, when they got back, you mentioned today that on college campus at Davidson on Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, it was your players that stood in the public square and read the victims of the Holocaust names out loud. What were some other action items that came not from you saying, guys, you got to do this, but based on the experience, they came back, like Kellen Grady, in terms of his experience and what he created as well?
It's an interesting composite of our team. We're international in a lot of respects. So the first two players you saw on the film, one was from Serbia, one is from Sweden. We had a player from England. We had a player from Austria. So we had 4 European players on the roster. We had black guys. We had white guys. We had blacks from the north, blacks from the south, whites from the north, whites from the south.
Kellen Grady started an organization called CARE, in which he tried to get people interested in caring and respecting. It was more designed for not a lot of the initiatives that we see today in our world, but the word respect was very prominently displayed in it. And Kellen Grady's mother was the general counsel for the country of South Africa to the United States. His grandmother taught Nelson Mandela how to drive a car. And it's interesting, the entire diversity of our team was an outreach and an opportunity for our players to reach into so many different directions. So it was not just in one lane that they traveled in every lane, and they brought it back home. And I think we know that the world is sometimes has havens for anti-Semitism, and some of our guys went back into their homeland where there was anti-Semitism, and they spoke about it. And to me, that was the whole process: education, communication. And the more there was education and the greater the communication, the greater the degree of respect that built up. Look at our world today. Look at the lack of respect in our world today, especially here in America. If we just added respect for human beings, how we could dramatically change the dialogue. And I think Eva represented that so very well. She went against the grain, offering forgiveness. I mean, that was a complete opposite from what a lot of people wanted. They wanted the eye for the eye, and Eva said, no, let's forgive, let's communicate, let's educate. And boy, she really educated us, and in the process, she educated a team that now it goes out there into the community and educates further.
And so this is your second time you've spoken in the synagogue. The first was this past year in New Jersey on Kristallnacht. So as your players took it home, you took the message out there. You're not here for anything else in Los Angeles besides literally this program. Flew in this morning and flying right after tonight back to Charlotte.
Well, you talk about education and communication. I grew up in Queens, New York, lower middle class family, very mixed neighborhood. I had a lot of Jewish friends growing up. When you play basketball in the 50s and the 60s in New York, there's a lot of Jewish guys that play basketball, a lot of great ones. I mean, great ones. A lot of great Jewish coaches, too. And it seems to have evaporated somewhat in our world today.
But you liked our gyms, right?
Yeah, 3 gyms. My goodness gracious. But you know, I come here and I see this magnificent temple, and I read the history, and I read about Rabbi Wolpe, and I see what you have here. And your purpose is to teach the Jewish faith, to have a relationship with God, to honor Israel, to be a safe haven for Jewish people, but for all people. What a message to me I'm a devout Catholic. What a message for me. You know, sometimes I looked at the 3 gyms, I thought we were in a Catholic church. You know? This is magnificent for me to be here. You've done more for me by being here than anything.
And so,
Let
go ahead.
me just add to that. You know, the 2 greatest gifts that God has given us are the gift of time and the gift of love. That's what you're giving me tonight. You're giving me the gift of time, the gift of love. But those are the same 2 gifts God wants back from us, the gift of time and the gift of love. And you just think about it. If you could have time in your pocket and just use it anytime you want it, any moment you want it, how valuable that is. And then you add love to it. My goodness, if I had to live my life over again, that's what I'd do. I'd give more time and more love, and that's what you give to me tonight, so thank you.
And so one more question for Coach, and then one more, and then we're going to open it up to conversation. You told me this afternoon that you've also been to Israel 3 times. How does that piece fit into the puzzle of what you experienced with Eva, with what you're doing here, and then what we can do going forward?
Well, each year at Davidson College, we would host 3 coaches from abroad to watch us practice for a month. And one particular year, a coach came from Jerusalem. And after he watched us, he says, Coach, you got to come back to Jerusalem and teach our coaches how to coach. So I went to Jerusalem the first time in 2016 and spent a week there. And I made one mistake. they took us to the Dead Sea, and I went swimming in the Dead Sea, and I went underwater.
Oh no.
And I had no idea. And there were these two lovely ladies on the shore yelling, "No, no, no!" But I've gone back twice since, and it's evolved into not just coaching coaches and coaching young players, but coaching families. And I talk with parents about leadership and culture and teamwork and how to be a good parent when your son's playing basketball, your daughter's playing basketball, and not yell at the coach or not say he needs 20 shots or whatever. So it's evolved into a terrific experience, and I'm just overwhelmed by the country of Israel. And of course, amidst what's going on there right now, I got there on a Wednesday, and there was a big protest against Bibi Netanyahu, and on Thursday there was a big protest in favor of him. So it was extraordinary. But you know what? You know what the protests? There was no firebombs. There was no rocks through windows. There was no arrests. There were drums, and there was noise, and there was a lot of people, but there was a respect there. And that's something that, again, impressed me.
It's important to remind ourselves of that as well, often as well. Alex, now that your mom has passed away, and as you would travel to Auschwitz with her, as you said, jokingly, but not to keep her out of trouble, what's your role now as the first line of survivors? And actually where's Carolyn? Carolyn Siegel, who actually started an organization called If You Heard What I Heard, which are grandchildren of survivors telling their grandparents' stories. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, my mom died in Krakow during one of our trips to Auschwitz 4 years ago this last week. And one of the regrets I have is that I never had the chance, she died suddenly, I never had the chance to say, you know, what should my role be? So I'm kind of doing this by the seat of my pants, meaning I'm trying to learn, and I'm involved. I'm now on the board of directors of Candles, and I still practice medicine full time. But, you know, I think in this day and age, it's so important to educate our young and, quite frankly, educate our old as well, because so many people they know about the Holocaust, but I don't think they understand at times the lessons that we all can use from a terrible thing to better our life, to better improve ourselves, and not only, but hopefully improve society. So I see myself hopefully continue my mom's work in some shape, manner, or form.
And then Graham, in Butler, where there's honestly not a large Jewish population, I think you represent something very special. What do you see your role in going forward? You mentioned Candles possibly having a branch near Butler. Now you coming out to a synagogue in LA, which 2 years ago we probably thought, like, why would we do this? But it was a must. So where do you see your role as well?
I see, you know, I think I have a small role in it, you know, with the book, is how can I, in a small way, can convey Eva's message, can, you know, spread word through the book. And, you know, I have two young daughters, 12 and 14. Maybe they're watching back in Indiana. I don't know. Or if they're in bed, that's fine too. But it is staggering to read about how many young people are not aware of the Holocaust. And anything I can do with the book, honestly, I've spoken all over with the two books that I've co-authored. This event and speaking at the synagogue back in New Jersey have truly been two of the highlights. I think we mentioned this in New Jersey, but I think one of the beautiful things is that Coach is Roman Catholic. I'm Episcopalian, which I like to say is Catholic without the guilt, unless you bump Sister Jean to the back of the book. But the beauty of people from different faiths coming together and banding together to continue to tell Eva's story of forgiveness, to to keep that message alive and to continue to educate about the Holocaust. The last thing I would say is our Butler students. You know, we continue to, every student that gets that scholarship, the Eva Kor scholarship, learns about her. We just had a dinner recently back in Indianapolis where we raised, I think, over $20,000 for that scholarship in one night, and told her story again to the population that was there. So I view my role as a very small one, to try to be a messenger of the great thing that Coach McKillip did. And I'll reiterate what Rabbi said. I mean, for him to come out here in a day's notice, or in a day's time, when he just retired, where he could be doing a number of different things, is really inspiring to me to continue that work. And the last thing I'd say, a bit emotional, but Alex is truly one of my great friends, and part of my role in that friendship is to continue to tell that story.
So I want to do one announcement, one question, because I have the microphone, about Steph Curry. Sorry, Coach. And then we're going to open it up to conversation. But there's been an announcement actually of a consortium through Stacey Gallen, which is the remind me of the long name.
It's Maimonides, but she changed the acronym. It's a different name. She changed the name.
But it's a consortium with actually the people up here, along with Dan Grunfeld, who's the son of Ernie Grunfeld, who was the only NBA player who was the son of Holocaust survivors. And we're going to be working on this work, trying to connect with college teams to also bring them to this trip without a basketball, to really bond people together over faith lines through a story of Eva Kor as well. And so my last question is, what is our role? We heard what your role is. What do you want from us? And what is our job out there?
Who's that for, me?
All of us.
I'll go first. I would think you listen to what we're talking about tonight and take it back to your family, to your community, and think, my mom would tell you, if you get up tomorrow morning and think of one thing you can do tomorrow to make the world a better place, she would be happy. That's what your role should be.
I would just say, when we think about heroes, oftentimes we think, I guess I'm a little hypocritical here because I talk about basketball a lot in my work, and Eva Kor and Mickey Kor, we have, I think, more pictures of Eva Kor around our house than maybe anybody. And if you're looking for a hero to showcase to a son, a daughter, a granddaughter, there's so many wonderful videos. And obviously she's known for her forgiveness, but the ability to survive Auschwitz, to overcome it, what a great gift to be exposed to a hero like that. And we live in a great age where, again, her speeches are captured on YouTube. And I would just encourage you to research those and look at those. Alex has brought books on his mom's life here as well. And find somebody out there to tell Eva's story to, because it inspires me every day, every week.
Well, I would borrow a quote from a Catholic, Francis of Assisi. He said, "Preach the gospel at all times, but only use words when necessary."
Thank you. And so in just a moment, we'll open it up to questions. Amanda has the microphone so everybody can hear at home, and us as well. But you just mentioned a quote from a theologian. I know you're not a prophet, but in 2008, did you see Steph Curry as the player that we see today?
Well, I wish you knew more than the jump shots and the spectacular athleticism of Stephen Curry, what he is as a person, because if there's somebody that preaches the gospel at all times and uses words only when necessary, it's Stephen. And sometimes he doesn't use words, he actually throws his mouthpiece. And he's done that twice. I did not forecast that he'd be the great, and he's a game-changing player in the game of basketball. I thought he'd be another Sam Cassell, so a guy that could play in the league for 12, 14 years, have a very successful career, but not change the game the way he has. And I'm just overwhelmed with all the initiatives that he's involved with in his life. He is a outstanding husband, father, sibling, son, teammate, member of the world community.
If you haven't checked out on YouTube, Coach McKillop's graduation speech to Steph, which was just last year, I believe, right? He went back to Davidson to finish his degree. Highly worth out checking as well. So we're going to open up the questions for our esteemed panel who's joining here. So, Rachel?
First and foremost, thank you so much. This was amazing. Oh, can you hear? I had problems with this about a month ago. So 2 questions. First, Coach, did you have any players who did not want to go on the trip? And if so, did they give you any reasons? And my second question, a little different. Have you ever thought about bringing tours of high school students? Because I love that you're talking about for different faiths, coming from different places, but bringing those starting even younger so everybody can learn from each other. And what you talk about time and respect, I think we can start a lot earlier than college.
The trip for our players was completely voluntary, and many of them were not even on campus. So they had to get to campus and organize and then go on the trip. And every one of them and every coach, so the entire roster and the entire coaching staff came and willingly did it. And as I said, it was exhaustive. It was exhaustive physically, but it was exhaustive emotionally. It was incredibly exhaustive emotionally. As far as high school, maybe you guys can address that, but what I found fascinating, and I don't know that this was a response to our trip, but the state of North Carolina is now contemplating making Holocaust studies as part of the history curriculum in high schools, which I think is an absolutely imperative step that needs to be taken. And it surfaced right after our trip, so I don't know if there was any process of us being involved in that, but nevertheless, that would be something that I think is a first step.
I can take the second question. So we've been going back to Auschwitz since 1985, and probably in the last 15 years, we've had, believe it or not, Billings West High School in Billings, Montana we have 10 kids that come about every summer with us. And then Miles City, Montana, which is a little 8,000 small town. So we have had about 200 high school kids come with us every year. We just got back 2 weeks ago. And these high school kids just are amazing because there's usually 1 or 2 that the first day you can tell, okay, they're not dealing with this well. And more times than not, we did it this year. We'll have a little breakout session at the end of the day to try to make sure that, we know where they're at, what they're thinking, because it's a process and you don't know how people are going to react. And this time there was one girl that wasn't dealing with it well, and after we had this talk, she did a lot better and was really, and most when they go back to their community, really are changed. They really, most of these were juniors and seniors in high school and have been over the years. We have a middle school in Bloomington, Indiana that comes during our anniversaries. We go 2005, 2010, and they've had kids as young as 11 years old go.
Wow.
Thank you all for being here. It was a very enlightening evening. I don't have a question, but I have a personal story. I met Eva many years ago, and my husband and I were in Washington, D.C. We'd taken our granddaughter, Hannah, with us to tour the sites. We went to the Holocaust Center, and the 3 of us, my husband and I and Hannah, we went to the Holocaust Center, and we usually take them to the exhibit called Daniel's Story because it's relative to young children. Afterwards, we went into the gift shop, and Eva was there. And I think she was promoting a book that she had written. I wasn't sure. It was so many years ago. Hannah was 11, and she was milling around, and she was listening to your mom, and and then your mother looked up at her and said to her, "Are you Jewish?" And Hannah said, "Yes." And we might have bought the book, I can't remember, but I don't know whether Hannah imbibed that question, because when she said, "Yes, I am," your mother said, "You must marry a Jewish boy." So whether that stayed with her or not, I'm not sure, because as Hannah grew and she matured and she started dating and everything, we did not see a Jewish boy in her life. But to close the story, during the years, there were always articles about your mom floating in and out of the papers. I would cut them out. I would send them to her. I said, "You remember this woman?" "Yes, I do. We met her in Washington. She asked me if I was Jewish. She said I had to marry a Jewish boy." I said, "Right, that's the one." So this past March 30th, she was married to a young boy named Joe Goldstein.
Thank you. Thank you.
Lovely memories.
Carol?
Okay. Well, I just want to thank you all for, this has been an amazing, wonderful program. And Rabbi Sherman, thank you for all of the support for If You Heard What I Heard. As the rabbi mentioned, I filmed the stories of grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, 3Gs. And it's really interesting because I've done 40 of these, and one of the questions I ask them is, what's the lesson? What's the takeaway? And more often than not, the answer is, resilience to like no matter what I'm going through in my life, it's like nothing, compared to what my grandparents went through. And so, Coach, this is a question for you, from taking these players on this trip, and you talked about forgiveness, which is, I'm blown away by your mom for that, really. But was there any talk of resilience, in the locker room or after that? Because I would imagine, I'm not a basketball player, but I would imagine that you have to have resilience, in various situations as a player and as a team. And so I'm curious to know if resilience is one of the things that came up for you or for your team on that trip.
I thought that the one very evident aspect of the resilience was in injuries. When someone had an ankle injury or someone had a knee injury or someone was taken out of practice or a couple of games because of an injury, there was this sense of, well, it's only a short period of time. It's nothing what we saw in Auschwitz. So it hovered around our players' mentality in so many different ways. And relative to injuries, that was one that was very apparent.
I can jump in Graham's book, and so after we get back in July 2018, I get a couple of emails from players. And then a year later, to the day my mom passes away, and some of the emails I got from the coaches and players talked about resilience, and it was special. But very special, and I think it really, to me, proved that the trip really meant a lot to all the coaches and the players. Thanks.
It's for the audience at home. Yeah. Yeah.
What do each of you view as the key points of intersection between sports and forgiveness?
I knew a Duke graduate would ask a really hard question. It's my good friend Rachel. I think it's a large platform to share with a wide audience. Alex and I were talking about this today. It's a well-known story, I believe, in the 70s, and I think he was a Laker at the time, but you may be familiar with an incident in a game where Kermit Washington punched Rudy Tomjanovich. Does anybody remember that? Okay, and it was a brutal, brutal blow. And Rudy Tomjanovich ended up being the Rockets coach for a number of years. Was in serious trouble medically after that. And the book talks about later on, Tomjanovich forgave him. And the beauty and maybe sometimes the unfortunate thing with sports is that, again, the masses see these lessons, good or bad. And I think of that story in particular, how many people saw that and say, I I would never forgive that person for punching me. And so I think, again, sports can convey that message of forgiveness that maybe we don't see in our own lives on such a grand scale.
I might steal your thunder, but so in the documentary that Stacy did, one of the players, Cal, who is a very eloquent speaker, he talks about that he realized that one of the things that was lost upon the Nazis and during this time was the lack of empathy. And I think Coach talked about respect. I think in order to be able to forgive somebody, you're going to have to be able to relate to somebody with respect and also empathize with them. And I think the moment you start losing these human characteristics, you become less human. And I think the way that perhaps it trickles into the field, the community of sports and athletics, is that you've got to build a team, you got to have respect, you got to have empathy to your teammates. And I think, my mom, we struggled with the word forgiveness. At times we wanted to call it reconciliation, but I think it's the closest thing in the English language to what she did. And she really she's criticized a lot more since she's passed away, but she really forgave the memory of what happened.
Okay, so in the beginning you mentioned that your mom completed her life by this forgiveness, but also it was controversial because some people didn't like that or were counter to that, which is understandable. But can you elaborate on that a little bit more? Some of the emotions of, it's a very brutal situation that people were in. So can you elaborate on some of the counter of...
The counter started at the dinner table with my father, who didn't necessarily forgive until he realized that his favorite basketball player was Dirk Nowitzki, and that possibly Dirk Nowitzki's grandparents might have been, and so he forgave Dirk Nowitzki. So, true story. He calls me one day, he says, I'm going to call a press conference. I said, okay, Dad, what are you going to talk about? I'm going to forgive Dirk Nowitzki's family. I go, Dad, they may not. He goes, I'm just doing it as a symbolic measure. The reason my mom was criticized was many. First of all, people said, well, why does she have to be so outspoken with her forgiveness? And I agree, and if you watch the movie Eva A-7063, which is Ted Green's documentary, I think it's somewhat of a very self-centered stance, a perspective. Why does everybody need to know about my forgiveness? And I argued with her at the beginning. I said, Mom, I don't think you understand that this is not going to be a popular thing. But then I saw these people that had nothing to do with being Jewish, that had nothing to do, they didn't really want to know about Holocaust history. They wanted to know how they could forgive their Uncle Charlie for doing something terrible to them as a kid. They wanted to learn how to forgive an old girlfriend or whatever, something not as magnificent and terrible as the Holocaust. But for the most part, she was able to change so many lives that I kind of saw, well, I might have disagreed, but over a period of time, she's doing so much good. The reason I think she was criticized is that at times she would say, look, she had to forgive her mom and her dad because she hated her mom and dad for not protecting her. She forgave everybody, and she would include the fact that she even forgave, quote unquote, all the Nazis, even though all the Nazis didn't harm her. And that's where she's criticized. And I think it's a fair criticism because she would talk about forgiving Dr. Mengele, and then she actually met a Dr. Munch, a Hans Munch, an SS doctor who was cleared of all charges. That's where the forgiveness started. But I think the fact that she forgave in some people's eyes on behalf of other people, that was the source of the criticism. And I understand that criticism. But at the end of the day, I'm so proud, that she did this, because in my mind, in 1995, when she did this, she was having some health issues. It gave her almost another 14, 15 years of life. And I think it really made her 24 years of life. It made her a much healthier person. And I think it gave people a reason to think about forgiveness. In the movie by Ted Green, there's a minister from the Duke Divinity School that says, look, when something bad happens, now people can't say that you don't forgive. You can go look up Eva Kor and maybe learn how to forgive. So it's still debated today. It's debated on the candles board how much of an emphasis we should have. But to me, as a child of the lady that did this, because we're still talking about it 4 years after she passed away, I think it's a worthwhile venture. I don't know.
Okay, but the question is, why was she forgiving her parents?
Why did she forgive her parents? Because
what did the parents? What could they do at that time? I mean,
1939, when my mom was 4 years old, her dad went to Israel to look at Palestine to see if it was a place to go. Even at the age of 5, my mom heard somebody yelling in the radio, and her parents were listening. That was Hitler. She knew something was bad was happening. So she blamed her parents for her being an orphan. So she hated her parents, and especially her dad. So she decided she was going to have a clean slate. Why have this chip on her shoulder her whole life? She wanted to be free. And I will say also, some people in the Jewish faith will argue that forgiveness is really it's more of a Christian thing. And that can be debated, because I've heard plenty of rabbis argue both ways. So I think that's the other reason she was criticized, or has been criticized, that it's maybe not, even though we have Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, but I think it's something that still needs to be considered by all people from all walks of life. One thing my mom wanted was, when little kids learn reading, writing, arithmetic, she thinks little kids should learn the art of forgiveness.
Wow. Yeah, sorry, I'm keeping up a lot of time. But wait, you said she hated her dad?
She blamed her father for her being an orphan. They had a chance to go to Israel.
But how did the father would know, though? I mean, how was the father supposed to know what was going to happen? I mean,
Well, a young child is going to have a knee-jerk response to this. So, I mean,
You're saying when she was a child, at that time, she had those feelings for her parents, not as a grown-up when she was your mom.
I don't know if she read the letter of forgiveness when you were, but for the last 7 years of her life at the selection platform, she read a letter that she forgave her papa and her mama. So we can, kind of agree to disagree about when this started, but she always blamed her parents for her being an orphan. And that's why in the commencement speech, or any speech, she always would take the opportunity to make sure parents would hug their kids and kids were hugging their parents, because she didn't have a parent to hug. And that's why she wanted to forgive them. So maybe I'm not explaining well. But
let's make sure that other people have a chance to ask a question that we can ask after as well.
This is actually a story rather than actually asking a question. But my father, who's still living today, is a Holocaust survivor of Auschwitz. He's turning 94 the next couple of months. But he's probably one of the youngest survivors to actually work in Auschwitz, because he was 13 years old. God knows how he made it through during that time, because I'm not sure anybody knows, but 40 years after the war ended, approximately, there was an album that was found. Well, actually, there was pictures that were found that were made into an album, and it was called the Auschwitz album. So about 40 years later, my uncle, who also survived the war, and as well as my other uncle survived, but they were looking through the album, and they spotted themselves in a picture. And it's a picture of my dad. You can barely see him, my uncle, my other uncle who didn't survive, and my dad's twin sister on another page with his mom. So it's like, and as you enter Birkenau, I don't know if you remember, there's two pictures on a stand, right as you enter underneath the watchtower, and the picture is of my mom's, my grandmother and my aunt, who are in that picture. I don't know why they picked it, but it's been in a lot of different TV, documentaries and so on and so forth. But it's a very powerful picture of people who came off the trains, are waiting in line to be dispersed, I guess, from there. And my dad, when he first came off the trains, he he got into the line with his twin sister and his mom, and like the last minute, he decided just to dart out of that line and go with his brother and his father and his other brother, and he survived that way because immediately they were gassed. My grandmother and my aunt. So it was a miracle that they found these pictures after the war and made it into the Auschwitz album, and now it's we have it's truly a miracle. But my dad still survives today, and my mom as well. So it's quite a miracle. So anyway, I just wanted to tell you that story.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question, and then after there's Unbracketed book for sale, and then your mom's book also is out there as well, and our authors will be able to sign it. And before we ask the last question, just want to thank again Coach McKillip from literally traveling across the country for a couple of hours to be here, Alex Kor, and Graham Honaker, who have become friends of Sinai Temple, and we're really looking forward to doing this good work together with all of us as well. So Lacey.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Again, want to echo the thanks. Really special opportunity to learn more about this trip. I wondered if you could speak, you talked about how you saw the trip affect the players, their behavior at Davidson, their interaction as a team. I'm wondering if you could speak a bit more about how you've seen or anticipate the long-term effects of this trip. How do you, how maybe have you seen it affect the way they think about their own identities, their careers, their life, maybe also thinking about contemporary anti-Semitism, and yeah, just wondering if you could speak more about either have you seen or what you anticipate the long-term effects of this experience to be.
I just add one point in there. You said contemporary anti-Semitism. I would add anti-Semitism in the sports and entertainment world as well.
Well, our son was on the trip, and he was our assistant coach, and I saw the way he broke down on the trip as we walked past the glasses and the hair and the shoes, and I know he was teary-eyed and sobbing, speaking about witnessing that and thinking about his own two daughters, and couldn't wait to get home to hug them. And I don't know this is certain, but I suspect he will share that story with them as they get older and are able to understand what it means. But I know he shared it with his wife, and that's the kind of impact. One of the players who was on a trip, a non-scholarship player, actually wrote that song that was played. He's now, I think, studying film here at Southern Cal. His mother is Julianne Moore, the actress, and his father's a director and producer. I suspect that this is going to somehow captivate him as he moves forward in his career and involve his mom and his dad in that process as well. And when you add a penny to a penny and you do it a lot, soon you have a lot of pennies. You can't lift a pebble with a finger. There needs to be a lot of little things going on, and I think these little things add up. And just as with forgiveness with Eva, you cannot believe how many lives that is now touching, because it touched, I know just from my experience, 20 men, coaches, players, who now are touching it with their spouses, their girlfriends, their children. It's extraordinary, the impact of this.
And I would add, so Matt McKillop, Coach Matt McKillop is the head coach of Davidson, and just to make things full circle, there's now a 53-foot mural of my mom in downtown Indianapolis next to the arena where the Pacers play. And in December, Davidson played against Purdue, and I texted Matt. I said, "Hey, if you guys practice on that Friday, can you go to the mural?" So they, day before they played Purdue, and they played Purdue pretty well, they took a picture in front of the mural. So now the next generation of Davidson Wildcats at least understand the story. And I think one thing my mom would say and it kind of relates to what we've all talked about. When my mom would lecture to little kids, she had as I said earlier, had an ability to really touch them. And one of the things, because sometimes little kids, 8, 9, 10 years old, well, Mrs. Kor, what can I do to make this world better? Well, she would say, look, if you have a puddle and you throw a pebble into the puddle, there's a little bit of a ripple. If your friend throws a pebble into the lake, there's another ripple. If there's 100 of your classmates that throw a pebble into the lake, there's a huge wave. And that's how she would talk. And I think what Coach said, I think each of us can do one thing. And most of these kids that were on the trip are maybe at the most 26, 27 years old. So I think their life's ahead of them. But I think in keeping in touch with some of the other coaches besides Matt, I think they're all, definitely changed people now because of the trip.
And one of the assistant coaches is now the head coach at West Point, correct?
Yes, Kevin Kuwick, yes.
Yeah. We want to thank everybody for joining us, specifically our panelists. This is available online as well, so we'll send this out for those who are not here to make sure that the ripple effect continues. If you were a Bruin or a Trojan fan before, then you're also a Davidson Wildcat after tonight. I know for sure because of the good work that Coach you continue to do. And since we are in the chapel and remembering Eva's life and the goodness that she brought and the forgiveness that she brought, we conclude with the words of Yehi Zichro Baruch, Yehi Zichra Baruch, that may the memory of Eva Kor truly be a blessing for all of us for all time. And let us say, Amen. Thank you so much and have a great evening.